So I've done a video that gives a overview and first look at the CSB verse-by-verse layout Bible, which is what we're looking at here. But I thought it would be really fun and interesting and maybe helpful to compare it to some other Bibles, just to kind of give you an idea of what this really looks like and what they've done with it. What I think is interesting is that they really have given it more of what I call a fancy, elegant look than previous editions of the Christian Standard Bible. So let's go to the beginning of one of the books of the Bible. I'm going to compare this to an earlier edition. This is the Pew Bible CSB. And you can see what I'm talking about here. It's more really in the headings and in the book titles where you see the difference that I'm talking about. So what I really think is great about the font for the CSB designed by 2K Denmark is in this edition, it kind of has a more contemporary look to it when it's paired with these headings and book titles. But in this new verse-by-verse edition, it looks more classic and fancy, elegant. So I would say this font, not only is it very readable, but it's very versatile. So there it is in the previous edition. And notice how it looks in the new edition. I think it just looks a little bit more fancy. You can also see that as an example on this page here, the title page of the New Testament. Again, has that fancier looking font. This is what it looked like in a previous edition. I personally like this. I think it looks nice for what it is. And I've always loved the look of the CSB. When you get into Matthew here, you see these section headings, what they look like. And then compare that with the verse by verse. And those section headings have a bit of a different font to them, as well as the book title. And I think both look great. This just has more of a elegant, fancy look to it than the previous edition. Another interesting thing to compare this verse-by-verse Bible to is the ESV verse-by-verse Bible. And I'll start with the outside here. The CSB is a little bit bigger. It's just a little bit taller, wider, and even a little bit thicker. But when you get to the inside, what you notice is these Bibles are very, very similar to each other in their layout. This, I believe, in the ESV is a 9-point font. I think in the Christian Standard Bible, it's maybe a 9.5, 10 at the most. So very similar font size. These layouts are so similar to each other. You see the references in the bottom right-hand corner, footnotes, translator notes on the bottom, verse by verse, 2-column for both of these Bibles. A nice margin on the outside here, nice margin on the outside here. The Christian Standard Bible has a little bit more margin space in the gutter than the English Standard Version does. It just allows the text to be a little bit more visible and a little bit more space for writing. So I would say that works out a little bit better on the CSB than the ESV that I have, but not a whole lot different. When you look at the wingspan there, again, you can see they're very similar in size. The verse numbers in the CSB are in red, and they do have red highlights for the book titles and the chapter numbers. In the ESV, everything is in black. And really, it's just a trade-off. You can see these numbers really well. So that's nice when you're teaching. You can pick out the numbers in the ESV easily. However, these numbers are in red, and they're on the side. They're still very easy to see, but they're more subtle. So that's kind of nice aesthetically as you're reading. Those numbers don't stick out quite as much as you see here. This looks a little bit more academic to me, and this looks a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. But the numbers are very easy to find in the ESV, and that is nice. That is a bonus. In both of these Bibles, when you're in poetic sections of the Bible, it's still just a verse-by-verse format, no stanzas. So that's the same both with the CSB and the ESV double column verse by verse. So again, these are very, very similar Bibles. I believe both black letter text, even in the New Testament. Really, for what they are, they're basically the same Bible, one in the CSB, one in the ESV. I would say that the CSB is very similar to the ESV verse by verse. Another verse by verse Bible that I thought would be neat to compare with would be the New King James Version by Thomas Nelson that came out pretty recently. This is a verse by verse. The Nelson, however, is a center column reference, whereas the CSB has the references on the bottom. But they're both double column. They both have red highlights. About the only difference I'm really seeing is that the New King James Version has a little bit more red. It has red section headings, whereas the section headings in the CSB are in black. But red highlights in the references, just like you see in the CSB, and the verse numbers are in red, same with the CSB. The font size in the New King James is a little bit bigger. I do believe it is at least a 10-point font, comfort print. It's very bold, and it definitely is starker than the CSB print. So this print stands out a little bit better, but the CSB print is very readable, great leading between the lines, and still very, very easy to read. But the NKJV is probably slightly more readable from a distance. Looking at a poetic setting here in the Psalms, you will see that the CSB is just that verse-by-verse format, but in the New King James Nelson, it does actually have stanzas. And so aesthetically and from a readable standpoint, understanding the text and seeing it as poetry, this is nice. However, just from a utilitarian perspective, this doesn't take up as much space, and for teaching is just fine. But for reading through the Bible and for how it looks, it is nice to have those stanzas. So the NKJV is nice in that way. You will see that both Bibles here have a very nice, elegant look to them. They both did a great job. And the same thing with the New King James verse by verse. I think it just has a little bit more elegant look than the other comfort print New King James Bibles. They changed the font for their titles, and I think it just has a more classic, elegant look. So very similar to the CSB verse by verse in that way. I forgot to mention in the ESV you will see book summaries, and the same in the New King James. In the CSB verse by verse there are no book summaries. Looking at the Sermon on the Mount here in the CSB, again this is black letter text. In the New King James you do have a red letter. The nice thing about the red letter is that is a classic printing format. A lot of people really like it. The words of Christ stand out. But for teaching, it is nice and easy to see the black letter. And some people like black letter because there's a less of a difference in the print that you get. Sometimes with red letter, sometimes it gets lighter and darker depending on the page. But red letter is really nice and a lot of people do like it. One other thing I'll show here between the Nelson NKJV verse by verse and the CSB is just the size. They're both very similar in terms of their thickness, but you can see that as far as height and width, the NKJV is a smaller Bible. Actually, though, in the hand, the CSB doesn't feel a whole lot bigger, and you do get that nice margin space in the NKJV verse by verse. Not as much margin space. For me personally, that's not a make or break thing for me. I don't mind having the margins that are this size on the NKJV, but if you do want more writing space, that is a nice thing about this CSB. So I think you can see that the CSB verse by verse Bible is a real winner, and for those of us who've been waiting for the CSB to come out in a more premium format, this has been an answer to our desires and prayers. And not only is it very nicely constructed, but the text block is wonderful. It's very versatile. It looks beautiful, and it just has a really nice, readable, elegant look. But it's very useful, verse by verse, very easy to teach out of, good for study, and has these margins for being able to write notes in if you so desire. So, I mean, this CSB is just a wonderful, wonderful addition to have available for those of us who like the Christian Standard Bible. Thank you so much for watching a comparison of these Bibles brought to you from a First Perspective.